It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun filters through the clouds just right, casting soft shadows on the pavement. Michelle Johnson, a hard-working single mother of two, stepped into her local pharmacy with a sense of routine. This wasn't her first time here, far from it. She had been coming to the same store for years, always polite, always respectful. Today, she was there to pick up her son's asthma medication, a necessity that kept him breathing easy during allergy season. It should have been a simple errand, one of many on her long list of daily tasks. But little did she know, this visit would turn into something far more complicated and far more revealing about the world around her. As Michelle approached the counter, she noticed one of the security guards eyeing her suspiciously. He was a middle-aged white man, his arms crossed over his chest as if he were guarding Fort Knox instead of a pharmacy. At first, Michelle brushed it off. Maybe he was just having a bad day, or perhaps he was bored and looking for something, or someone to focus on. She handed over her ID and insurance card to the pharmacist behind the counter, expecting the usual quick transaction. But something felt off. The pharmacist hesitated, glancing down at the paperwork in front of her before looking back up at Michelle. "Is this your prescription?" she asked, her tone clipped and cold. Michelle blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes," she replied calmly. "It's for my son. He has asthma." The pharmacist didn't seem satisfied. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice, but not enough to hide the suspicion in it. "Are you sure? Because the name on the prescription doesn't match yours." Michelle frowned, confused. Of course the name didn't match hers, it was her son's prescription after all. She reached into her purse and pulled out a copy of his birth certificate, showing proof that she was indeed his mother and legal guardian. Surely this would clear things up. But instead of apologizing or moving forward with the transaction, the pharmacist called over another employee. That employee summoned the store manager, who arrived with furrowed brows and an air of authority. By now, Michelle could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her. Other customers began to notice too, turning their heads to see what the commotion was about. Some looked sympathetic while others seemed indifferent, but none of them stepped in to defend her. Not yet. And then, things took a darker turn. Two off-duty police officers stationed nearby were brought in under the pretense of verifying Michelle's identity. They weren't even in uniform, but their presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. One of them, a tall man with a stern expression, stepped closer to Michelle. His partner hung back, arms crossed, watching silently. "Ma'am, can you explain why you're trying to pick up this prescription?" the first officer asked, his voice firm and accusatory. Michelle took a deep breath, keeping her composure, despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I already explained to the pharmacist," she said evenly. "This is my son's medication. I have proof right here." She held up the birth certificate again along with her ID. But the officer barely glanced at the documents. Instead, he narrowed his eyes at her, as if searching for some hidden clue that would confirm his suspicions. "You seem awfully defensive," he remarked, his tone dripping with judgment. "Defensive?" Michelle bit back a retort, reminding herself to stay calm. She wasn't being defensive, she was being patient, explaining herself clearly despite the absurdity of the situation. Why should she have to justify picking up her own child's medicine? Still, she forced herself to smile politely, hoping to diffuse the tension. "I'm not being defensive," she said. "I'm just trying to get my son's medication so I can go home. Is there a problem here?" The officer didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to his partner and muttered something under his breath. Then, without warning, he started peppering Michelle with more questions. Where did she live? How old was her son? Had she ever been arrested before? Each question felt like a punch to the gut, designed not to gather information, but to intimidate her. Other customers started whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman finally spoke up, addressing the officers. "She's not doing anything wrong," she said firmly. "Why are you treating her like this?" The officers ignored her, focusing solely on Michelle. By now, tears pricked at the corners of Michelle's eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She thought about her son waiting for his medication, about the countless times she'd been made to feel less than because of the color of her skin. And she thought about how unfair it all was, how exhausting it was to constantly have to prove her worth, her humanity in situations like this. But Michelle wasn't alone in this moment. Outside the pharmacy, her teenage son Jordan had arrived after receiving a text from his mom saying she might be delayed. Through the window, he saw everything. His mother standing tall despite the obvious distress. The officers surrounding her, like predators circling prey. Anger bubbled inside him, hot and fierce. He knew racism existed. He'd heard stories, seen news reports. But witnessing it firsthand ignited a fire within him. Determined to help, Jordan pulled out his phone and started recording the interaction, knowing full well that footage could make all the difference later. The tension in the pharmacy was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michelle stood her ground, trying to remain composed despite the barrage of questions and accusations coming from the officers. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her son's birth certificate and ID, but she refused to let them see her fear. She had done nothing wrong, nothing illegal, and yet here she was, being treated like a criminal simply because of the color of her skin. One of the officers, clearly growing impatient, stepped even closer to Michelle. His tone shifted from questioning to outright confrontational. "You're not cooperating," he said, his voice sharp and accusatory. Michelle blinked, taken aback by the accusation. "I've been cooperating this whole time," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I showed you my ID, my son's birth certificate, and explained everything. What more do you want from me?" But the officer wasn't listening, or maybe he didn't care. He glanced at his partner, who gave a slight nod as if signaling that they were on the same page. Then, without warning, the first officer raised his voice, drawing stares from the other customers in the store. "We're just doing our job," he snapped, as if that justified their behavior. "If you don't have anything to hide, then why are you acting so defensive?" Michelle felt her chest tighten. Defensive? The word echoed in her mind, twisting into something ugly. She wasn't being defensive. She was being reasonable, explaining herself calmly despite the absurdity of the situation. But no matter how many times she tried to clarify, it seemed like nothing she said would satisfy them. They weren't interested in answers. They were looking for excuses to doubt her, to make her feel small and insignificant. By now, the scene had drawn a crowd. Other customers lingered near the counter, some watching silently, while others whispered among themselves. A few looked away, uncomfortable with the spectacle unfolding before them. One woman, an elderly lady with silver hair and glasses perched on her nose, stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the officers. "She's not doing anything wrong. Why are you treating her like this?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and pointed, but the officers ignored her completely. It was as if she didn't exist, as if only Michelle mattered, and not in a good way. The second officer finally spoke up, his voice low but laced with authority. "Ma'am, we're handling this. Please step back." The elderly woman hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly returned to her spot in line. But her intervention had sparked something in the room, a flicker of resistance, however small. People began exchanging glances, murmuring quietly. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Wordlessly, they were choosing sides, deciding whether to stay silent or speak up. Outside the pharmacy, Jordan watched through the glass doors, his heart pounding in his chest. He recognized the look on his mother's face, the one she wore, when she was holding back tears, when she was forcing herself to stay strong despite the pain bubbling beneath the surface. It broke something inside him, seeing her treated this way. He thought about all the times she'd told him stories about facing discrimination at work, in stores, even in schools when he was younger. Back then, those stories had seemed distant, almost unreal. But now, standing here and witnessing it firsthand, it hit him like a freight train. Jordan clenched his fists, anger coursing through him. He wanted to storm inside, to yell at the officers, to demand they leave his mother alone. But he knew better. Acting impulsively wouldn't help. He needed to think strategically. So instead, he pulled out his phone and started recording the interaction. He zoomed in on his mother's face, capturing her calm demeanor despite the chaos around her. He panned over to the officers, noting their body language, their dismissive expressions. Then he turned the camera toward the crowd, showing the mix of reactions from the other customers. As he filmed, Jordan's mind raced. He remembered something his grandmother used to say: "When people try to silence you, use your voice louder. When they refuse to listen, find someone who will." His grandmother had always been wise, her advice rooted in decades of experience navigating a world that often dismissed her because of her race. And right now, Jordan needed that wisdom more than ever. He stopped recording and opened his social media app. With trembling fingers, he typed out a caption: "My mom is being harassed by police officers at our local pharmacy for no reason. This is what racism looks like. Justice for Michelle." He uploaded the video and hit post, knowing it might take time for it to gain traction, but hoping anyone would see it and care. Still, Jordan knew posting online wasn't enough. He needed to escalate things further, to go straight to the source of power, remembering another piece of advice from his grandmother: "If you ever feel powerless, go straight to the top." He decided to take matters into his own hands. After a quick Google search, he found the direct line to the city's police chief, Chief Laura Reynolds. Taking a deep breath, he dialed the number, praying she would answer. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice came on the line. "Chief Reynolds speaking." Jordan swallowed hard, suddenly nervous. "Hi, Chief Reynolds? My name is Jordan Johnson, and I need to report something urgent. My mom is currently being detained at a pharmacy by 2 off-duty police officers. They're accusing her of trying to pick up a prescription that belongs to my little brother, but it's hers, she's his guardian. They're treating her like a criminal, and it's all because she's black." There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, Jordan worried he'd made a mistake. Maybe she wouldn't believe him. Maybe she'd hang up. But then Chief Reynolds spoke again, her tone firm but compassionate. "Thank you for calling, Jordan. Can you tell me exactly where this is happening?" Jordan quickly rattled off the address of the pharmacy, describing the scene in detail. He sounded so articulate and passionate that Chief Reynolds couldn't dismiss him as just another complainer. Instead, she listened intently, promising to investigate immediately. "I'll send someone over right away," she assured him. "Stay safe and keep recording if you can." Hanging up, Jordan felt a surge of hope, but also uncertainty. Would the police chief actually follow through? Or would this call end up being another dead end, another example of promises made but never kept? He didn't know, but he couldn't afford to dwell on doubts. For now, he focused on staying present, on supporting his mother however he could. Inside the pharmacy, the situation continued to escalate. The officers grew increasingly agitated, their voices rising as they peppered Michelle with more questions. "Why won't you answer us directly?" one of them demanded, leaning in too close for comfort. Michelle took a step back, her patience wearing thin. "I've answered every single question you've asked," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what else you want from me." Just then, the door to the pharmacy swung open, and several uniformed officers entered, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The original pair of officers froze, their expressions shifting from smug confidence to unease. One of them muttered something under his breath, clearly unhappy about the sudden arrival of reinforcements. The new officers approached cautiously, assessing the situation before turning to Michelle. "Ma'am, are you okay?" one of them asked, his tone far gentler than the others had been. Michelle nodded, relief washing over her face. "Yes, thank you," she said softly. "I just want to get my son's medication and go home." The tension in the room eased slightly, though the damage had already been done. Customers began to disperse, some offering quiet words of support to Michelle as they passed. Others lingered, eager to see how the situation would resolve. Outside, Jordan exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with relief. Whatever happened next, he knew he'd done everything he could to protect his mother and to shine a light on the injustice they'd faced together. As the uniformed officers entered the pharmacy, The atmosphere shifted dramatically. The two off-duty officers who had been questioning Michelle exchanged uneasy glances, their confident demeanor faltering under the scrutiny of their colleagues. It was clear that they hadn't expected backup to arrive so quickly, or at all. One of them muttered something under his breath, though it was too low for anyone else to hear. The other straightened his posture, attempting to appear professional, despite the tension radiating from him. The new officers wasted no time in taking control of the situation. They introduced themselves to Michelle, their tone calm and respectful, a stark contrast to the aggressive attitude she'd endured just moments before. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Ramirez," one of them said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Can you tell us what's going on here?" Michelle hesitated, still shaken by the ordeal but relieved to finally have someone listen to her. She recounted the events step by step, explaining how she had come to pick up her son's asthma medication, how the pharmacist and security guard had questioned her identity, and how the off-duty officers had escalated things unnecessarily. Her voice wavered slightly as she described the accusations hurled at her, but she remained composed, determined to convey the truth without letting her emotions overwhelm her. While Michelle spoke, Officer Ramirez took notes, occasionally nodding to show he understood. His partner, Officer Patel, turned to the original officers and asked them to explain their side of the story. Their responses were defensive and disjointed, filled with vague references to protocol and verifying information. But even as they spoke, it was obvious that their actions had been driven more by bias than by any legitimate concern for safety or procedure. Meanwhile, outside the pharmacy, Jordan stood frozen, his phone still clutched tightly in his hand. He watched through the glass doors as the scene unfolded inside, his heart racing with a mix of anxiety and hope. When he saw the way the new officers treated his mother, with respect and fairness, it felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest. For the first time since arriving, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, savoring the momentary relief. But Jordan knew this wasn't over yet. While the immediate crisis seemed to be resolving, the bigger picture loomed large in his mind. This wasn't just about his mother. It was about every black person who had ever been mistreated because of the color of their skin. It was about accountability, justice, and ensuring that incidents like this didn't happen again. With renewed determination, he opened his social media app and checked the video he'd posted earlier. To his surprise, it had already started gaining traction. Comments poured in from friends, acquaintances, and strangers alike. "This is unacceptable. We stand with you, Jordan. What can we do to help?" Encouraged by the outpouring of support, Jordan decided to keep the momentum going. He typed out another update, thanking everyone for their kind words and urging them to share the video widely. "Let's make sure people see this," he wrote. "Racism thrives in silence, but together, we can shine a light on it and demand change." Back inside the pharmacy, Officer Ramirez concluded his conversation with Michelle and addressed the crowd of customers who had gathered nearby. "Folks, I want to assure you that we're handling this situation appropriately," he said, his voice carrying authority but also empathy. "If anyone witnessed anything or has concerns, please feel free to reach out to us directly." Several customers nodded approvingly, some even applauding softly. One woman stepped forward and handed Officer Ramirez her business card, offering to provide a written statement later. Others followed suit, eager to contribute to the investigation. The sense of solidarity in the room was palpable, a reminder that while injustice could divide people, it could also bring them together when faced head-on. Once the initial chaos subsided, Officer Ramirez escorted Michelle to the counter, where the pharmacist, who now looked visibly uncomfortable, handed over the prescription without further questions. Michelle accepted it with quiet dignity, her hands trembling slightly, as she tucked it into her bag. As she turned to leave, several customers offered her words of encouragement. "You handled that beautifully," one man said, giving her a small smile. "Stay strong." Outside, Jordan rushed to meet his mother, pulling her into a tight hug. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Michelle nodded, though tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm fine, baby," she said softly. "Thanks to you." They stood there for a moment holding each other, drawing strength from their bond. But even as they embraced, Jordan couldn't shake the anger simmering beneath the surface. This shouldn't have happened in the first place, he thought bitterly. His mother shouldn't have had to endure such humiliation simply for being black. And while the immediate threat had passed, the scars would remain. For her, for him, and for countless others who lived with the constant fear of discrimination. Later, that evening, Chief Laura Reynolds arrived at the precinct to review the details of the case. True to her word, she had acted swiftly after receiving Jordan's call, dispatching officers to the scene and initiating an internal investigation. Now, sitting in her office, she listened intently as Officer Ramirez briefed her on what had transpired. Her expression grew increasingly grim as he recounted the behavior of the off-duty officers, their lack of professionalism, and the clear bias underlying their actions. "This is unacceptable," Chief Reynolds said firmly, slamming her palm against the desk for emphasis. "We're supposed to protect and serve, not intimidate and accuse based on stereotypes. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, how can we expect the public to trust us?" She instructed Ramirez to gather statements from everyone involved, including witnesses, and to compile all available evidence, including Jordan's video. Then she picked up the phone and called the pharmacy's corporate headquarters, demanding an explanation for the role their employees had played in escalating the situation. By the end of the call, she had secured a promise from the company to cooperate fully with the investigation and take corrective action. Word of the incident spread rapidly beyond the confines of the pharmacy. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing interviews with witnesses and sharing clips of Jordan's viral video. Community leaders condemned the officer's behavior, calling for transparency and reform within the police department. Protesters began gathering outside the pharmacy, holding signs that read "Justice for Michelle" and "End Systemic Racism Now." Their chants echoed through the streets, a powerful reminder that silence was no longer an option. For Michelle and Jordan, the days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, they were grateful for the overwhelming support they received from friends, neighbors, and strangers alike. On the other hand, they were acutely aware of the broader implications of what had happened. This wasn't just their story. It was a reflection of a systemic issue that affected millions of people across the country. Despite the challenges ahead, Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his actions, calling the police chief, posting the video, speaking out, had sparked something much larger than he could have imagined. And as he sat beside his mother that night, watching the news coverage unfold, he made a silent vow. He wouldn't stop fighting until real change was achieved. Because if one teenager with a phone could make a difference, then imagine what an entire community united could accomplish. The days following the incident at the pharmacy were a blur of activity for Michelle and Jordan. While they tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, the world around them seemed to be spinning faster than ever. News outlets couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #Justice for Michelle and "End Systemic Racism." The video Jordan had posted continued to gain traction, racking up thousands of views, shares, and comments. People from all walks of life weighed in, some sharing their own stories of discrimination, others calling for accountability and reform. Chief Laura Reynolds wasted no time addressing the situation publicly. She held a press conference just 2 days after the incident, standing before a room full of reporters with an expression that conveyed both seriousness and resolve. "What happened at that pharmacy is unacceptable," she began, her voice firm but measured. "No one should be treated the way Ms. Johnson was treated, not by law enforcement, not by anyone. This department exists to protect and serve, and we failed in that mission." She went on to outline the steps being taken to address the issue. First, the 2 off-duty officers involved in the altercation were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal investigation. Second, Chief Reynolds announced plans to implement mandatory sensitivity training for all officers in the department, focusing specifically on recognizing and combating implicit bias. Finally, She pledged to work closely with community leaders, to rebuild trust between the police force and the people they served. Her words resonated with many, but not everyone was satisfied. Some critics argued that suspending the officers wasn't enough. They wanted them fired outright. Others questioned whether sensitivity training would truly lead to meaningful change, or if it was just another empty gesture designed to placate public outrage. Despite these concerns, most agreed that Chief Reynolds' swift response was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, the pharmacy chain where the incident occurred found itself under intense scrutiny. Corporate executives scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing a formal apology and promising to investigate the actions of the employees involved. In a statement released to the media, the company acknowledged that its staff had mishandled the situation and vowed to take corrective action. Within days, several employees, including the pharmacist who had initially questioned Michelle's identity, were terminated. The company also announced plans to revise its policies regarding customer interactions, ensuring that similar incidents wouldn't happen again. But firing employees and revising policies weren't enough to quell the growing backlash. Protesters continued to gather outside the pharmacy, holding signs and chanting slogans that demanded justice not just for Michelle, but for countless others who had faced similar treatment. Local activists organized rallies and town hall meetings, inviting community members to share their experiences and propose solutions. It became clear that this single incident had tapped into a much larger conversation about systemic racism and inequality. For Michelle, the attention was overwhelming. On one hand, she appreciated the support she received from friends, neighbors, and even strangers. But on the other hand, reliving the ordeal over and over again, in interviews, during protests, and through social media, was emotionally draining. There were moments when she wished she could simply retreat from the spotlight and focus on raising her children in peace. Yet deep down, she knew that staying silent wasn't an option. If sharing her story could help prevent someone else from going through the same thing, then it was worth it. Jordan, too, struggled with the newfound attention. Overnight, he had gone from being an ordinary teenager to a symbol of hope and resilience. Friends texted him constantly, praising his bravery and thanking him for speaking out. Teachers commended him in class, using his actions as an example of how young people could make a difference. Even local politicians reached out, inviting him to speak at events and join advocacy groups. At first, Jordan felt proud of what he had accomplished. He had stood up for his mother when she needed him most, and in doing so, he had sparked a movement that showed no signs of slowing down. But as the days turned into weeks, the pressure began to weigh on him. Reporters hounded him for interviews, asking questions he didn't always know how to answer. Strangers approached him in public, expecting him to have all the solutions to complex problems he barely understood himself. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his mom, Jordan finally voiced his frustrations. "I didn't ask for any of this," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted to help you. I never thought, I didn't expect it to blow up like this." Michelle reached across the table and placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I know, baby," she said softly. "And you did help me, you saved me. But sometimes when you stand up for something, it grows bigger than you ever imagined. That doesn't mean you're alone, though. We'll figure this out together." Her words reassured him, but they also reminded him of the responsibility he now carried. This wasn't just about him and his mom anymore. It was about every person who had ever been mistreated because of the color of their skin. And while the weight of that realization was daunting, it also fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. In the weeks that followed, Michelle and Jordan decided to channel their energy into advocacy work. They partnered with local organizations focused on racial equity and police reform, attending workshops, hosting discussions, and speaking at events. They met other families who had faced similar injustices, forming bonds that strengthened their resolve. Together, they worked to turn their pain into purpose, using their platform to amplify voices that had long been ignored. One particularly memorable event took place at a community center downtown. Michelle and Jordan joined a panel of activists, educators, and law enforcement officials to discuss ways to bridge the gap between communities and police departments. As Michelle shared her story, the audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement or wiping away tears. When it was Jordan's turn to speak, he stood up nervously but quickly found his rhythm. "I'm just a kid," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "But I've learned that age doesn't matter when it comes to standing up for what's right. My mom taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you are. So if I can make one call and spark a conversation that leads to change, then maybe you can too. Maybe we all can." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in a long time, Jordan felt a sense of hope. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult, and yes, there would be setbacks along the way, but change was possible. And it started with people willing to speak up, to listen, and to act. As the event wrapped up, Michelle pulled Jordan aside and hugged him tightly. "You're amazing, you know that?" she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." And together they walked out of the community center, ready to continue the fight, not just for themselves, but for everyone who deserved to live in a world free from fear and discrimination. Months had passed since the incident at the pharmacy, but its impact lingered, not just for Michelle and Jordan, but for the entire community. What had started as a single act of discrimination had grown into a movement, sparking conversations about racial equity, accountability, and systemic change. For Michelle and Jordan, life was different now. They were no longer just mother and son. They were advocates, educators, and symbols of resilience. Their story had resonated with so many people that it became a catalyst for action, inspiring others to step forward and share their own experiences. The internal investigation into the officers' conduct concluded with mixed results. The two off-duty officers who had harassed Michelle were formally reprimanded and stripped of their duties for 6 months. While some felt this punishment wasn't severe enough, Chief Laura Reynolds emphasized that the decision was based on evidence gathered during the investigation. "This isn't about revenge," she said in a follow-up press conference. "It's about accountability and learning. These officers will undergo extensive training, not just on bias, but on how to rebuild trust within the communities they serve." Chief Reynolds also announced broader reforms within the police department. In addition to mandatory sensitivity training, she introduced new guidelines for handling non-criminal disputes, ensuring that officers approached such situations with empathy rather than suspicion. She invited community members to participate in advisory panels, giving them a voice in shaping policies that affected their daily lives. Slowly but surely, the department began to shift its culture, prioritizing collaboration over confrontation. 4. The pharmacy chain. The fallout was equally transformative. After firing several employees involved in the incident, the company launched an initiative called Respect and Dignity for All Customers. This program included updated training modules for staff, emphasizing the importance of treating every customer fairly regardless of race, gender, or background. They also created a hotline where customers could report instances of mistreatment, promising swift action in response to complaints. To further demonstrate their commitment to change, executives partnered with civil rights organizations to host workshops on diversity and inclusion. But while these institutional changes were significant, the real transformation happened on a personal level for Michelle, Jordan, and countless others inspired by their courage. Michelle found herself speaking at schools, churches, and community centers, sharing her story with anyone willing to listen. Her message was simple yet powerful. We all deserve to be treated with respect. No one should have to prove their worth because of the color of their skin. Jordan, too, became a prominent voice in the fight for justice. He joined a youth-led advocacy group focused on reforming policing practices and addressing systemic racism. Together, they organized rallies, wrote letters to elected officials, and even met with lawmakers to push for legislative changes. Despite his young age, Jordan's passion and eloquence earned him respect from adults twice his age. People often remarked that he carried himself with a maturity beyond his years, a testament to the strength he had inherited from his mother. One of the most memorable moments came when Jordan was invited to speak at a national conference on racial equity. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of attendees, he recounted the events of that fateful day at the pharmacy. His voice trembled slightly as he described the fear and anger he had felt watching his mother being mistreated. But then he shifted gears, speaking with conviction about the importance of standing up against injustice. "I used to think that one person couldn't make a difference," he admitted, pausing to let his words sink in. "But I was wrong. When my mom needed me, I made one phone call, and that call changed everything. It showed me that even small actions can lead to big changes. So if you're sitting there wondering whether your voice matters, let me tell you, it does. Speak up, stand up, because together we can create a world where everyone is treated equally." The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Jordan smiled shyly, glancing toward the back of the room where Michelle sat, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed the words, "I'm proud of you." And in that moment, Jordan knew that all the challenges they had faced were worth it. Back home, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, but with a renewed purpose. Michelle continued working her job, raising her children, and advocating for change in her spare time. Jordan balanced schoolwork with his activism, finding joy in both. Their bond had grown stronger through the ordeal, forged in the fires of adversity but tempered by love and resilience. As months turned into years, the ripple effects of their actions continued to spread. Other families came forward with similar stories, emboldened by Michelle and Jordan's example. Local businesses implemented anti-discrimination policies inspired by the pharmacy chain's reforms. Law enforcement agencies across the country took note of Chief Reynolds' efforts, adopting similar measures to improve community relations. Through it all, Michelle and Jordan remained humble, aware that their journey was part of a much larger fight. They knew that racism wouldn't disappear overnight, that true equality required sustained effort and unwavering determination, but they also knew that progress was possible, one step at a time. On the anniversary of the incident, Michelle and Jordan visited the same pharmacy where it had all begun. Walking inside, they noticed subtle but meaningful changes. Posters promoting inclusivity hung on the walls, and employees greeted customers with warm smiles. A plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of those who stood up for justice, reminding us to treat everyone with dignity and respect." Standing there, hand in hand, Michelle and Jordan reflected on how far they had come. The pain of that day would always linger, but so would the lessons they had learned. They had shown the world that even in moments of despair, hope could emerge, through courage, unity, and action. As they left the store, Jordan turned to his mom and grinned. "You know what, Mom? We did good." Michelle smiled back, her eyes shining with pride. "Yes, we did, baby. And we're not done yet." And with that, they walked off into the sunlight, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together.